This is the installation instruction video series for the Pinellas Power Products extended runtime fuel kit for the Yamaha EF6300is DE and the Yamaha EF4500 ISE. The first item is going to be to take off the cabinets. The top two corner screws on each end are different from all the other screws in the cabinet. The top two corner screws will have a lock washer on them, and they'll be longer than every other screw in the cabinet. All the other screws will have a shoulder on them, which, as you can see, it's slightly shorter and it has a shoulder on it. Each of the end panels are held on with 7 screws, 5 being the shoulder style, and 2 of them being the longer ones with the lock washers on them. You'll notice that there is a gasket around the top. Make sure that the top and side gaskets don't come off. And this is simply a boot that goes over the air intake to cool the stator. The other end comes off the same way. The 2 upper corners have the longer screws with the lock washers. Front panel has 2 shouldered screws. Just like 5 of the screws in the end panels. And then it snaps. These little metal clips right here, here, and then 2 tabs that tuck into the top housing. The rear panel goes on the same as the front. 2 shouldered screws in the bottom. So it uses the shoulder screws here at either corner, the snap-in latches, and then the 2 tabs that tuck into the top. The outer end covers them, top 2 corners 6mm bolt. And then the bottom will have a shouldered screw in each corner. At this point, you can leave the bottom bolts in place and simply pop the cover off on the top. And this will allow you enough room to get at this panel, which is where the fuel pump is going to mount. If you have a right angle drill, you'll have plenty of room to drill the holes here and here. If you do not have a right angle drill, come down to the bottom. You've got 2 more Phillips head shouldered screws and 1 bolt in the center. Phillips head shoulder screws come out the same way as all the others. And the entire housing will come out. Like I say, you do not need to remove the entire cover if you have a right angle drill. The front cover does not need to come off in order to install the kit. I will be removing the front cover strictly to make it easier to see what I'm doing in the video. Sometimes the camera has trouble getting in at it. And again, it uses 2 of the shouldered screws. .10mm bolt going into the top at each handle location. And there's a bolt going into the bottom at the center. Nope. Missed the 2 bottom shoulder screws. I mentioned them and totally forgot to remove them. This will simply allow you to see from the camera's angle where the pulse line and the pickup fuel line are going to pass through the top. And that's probably as good a place as any to go ahead and take a break. Okay, we're going to be putting a pulse port into the valve cover area. Because this side of the valve cover is a little busy with the temperature sensor and the breather hose attached to it, we're going to put the pulse port in this side of the valve cover here. You'll notice that there's a breather plate mounted into the valve cover. Anything behind the breather plate will be a series of pressure, pressure, pressure instead of pressure, vacuum, pressure, vacuum. So it needs to be at this side of the breather plate so it goes back and forth from pressure to vacuum to pressure to vacuum. So what we're going to do is split the difference between this arc and this web, which will be right here, and put our pulse port right at this location, which is straight up from your dot and approximately even with the top of the casting where the valve cover mount bolt goes in. When you go to drill this hole, keep in mind that the valve cover is cast aluminum. It is not forged aluminum. So take it easy when you drill the hole. Now I'm going to remove the pilot bit. The final hole size is going to be 1/4 of an inch. Because I do want it to be a tight, tapered thread, so that's why I drill it with a 1/4 inch. And again, just very gently. The kits come with a 5/16 18 thread tap. If you've been paying attention, you notice that I drilled the hole to 1/4 of an inch. Yes, that hole is much smaller than is recommended for a 1/4 inch thread tap, or for a 5/16 thread tap. However, we're not going to be running the thread tap all the way in because we're going to be screwing a nylon fitting into the thread tap. Incidentally, the kits will come with the thread tap. They will not come with the tap wrench. You can either use an end wrench, or if you happen to have a tap set, then you can use your own tap wrench, your own thread tap too, for all that matters. We are not going to run this all the way in. I simply want it to start biting. The taps that are sent with the kits are a tapered tap. Okay. You'll get a pulse port that's included in the kit. The pulse port consists of a plastic elbow, or in this case a nylon elbow, the 5/16 nut. The 5/16 nut is chamfered on the side with the O-ring. What this does is allows the O-ring to recede into the nut slightly. Each kit will come with 2 of the plastic elbows, so if you mess up on one of them, you can simply swap it out, put this nut onto the new plastic elbow, making sure that the chamfered side faces the O-ring, and then put the O-ring onto the fresh nylon elbow. You'll see that the hole we drilled is just barely big enough for the nylon elbow to go into. So you'll look and make sure that you started to cut threads. On this one here, I didn't quite go in deep enough, so I'm going to go ahead and go back at it. Because I want the threads to pull it in. That's why I send a tapered tap with the kits. Once the pulse port is screwed all the way in, this lip on the other end will drop inside the valve cover, as you can see, and then it is not coming out. The seal is created by the rubber O-ring being compressed between the nut and the valve cover area itself. And if you make a mistake on it, like I stated earlier, the kit comes with 2 of the plastic elbows, so you can always remove it and try again. You'll want to orient the pulse port so when viewed from this end, it is as nearly vertical as possible. When you pull it out, you'll see that there's a small radius here and another small radius here. So if you point the pulse port to where it's nearly between them, you'll be in pretty good shape. When you go to put the valve cover back on, one of the valve cover bolts has a wire clip, and that's used to hold the hose that goes to the evaporative emissions canister. So this bolt will go in this bottom corner. At this point you can go ahead and put your breather hose back on and the connector for the engine temperature sensor. Probably as good a place as any to take a break. Okay, if you make a mistake threading this pulse port into the top of the valve cover, the kits come with 2 of the nylon elbows. Simply remove the O-ring from the damaged one, then unscrew the nut from the damaged one. You'll notice that one side of the nut is chamfered, and that's to allow the O-ring to be compressed into the nut itself. So take the new plastic or nylon elbow, just a little bit of oil on it, and then put the nut with the chamfered side facing out. Metal screw all the way up against the flange. Then take the rubber O-ring, slide it into place. Then take the new fitting, place it right into the hole that's tapped into the cast valve cover. Press in firmly as you screw it in. You'll notice that as soon as this barb goes inside the valve cover, you'll actually feel it catch. At that point, the rubber O-ring will be compressed to a thickness of approximately 1 millimeter. You want to clock the hose barb to where it points almost between these two radiuses. You can see a radius right here and one right here. That way when it's bolted to the engine, it will be almost vertically. So you can take it over here, hook up your breather hose again, and connect the temperature sensor. And slide your valve cover into place. You'll notice that there is a metal clip that holds the hose for the evaporative emission canister. It goes on this bottom valve cover bolt. Go ahead and snug the valve cover bolts down. Make sure your breather hose and your temperature sensor are in place. That's probably as good a place as any to go ahead and take a break. Okay, the next step is going to be to install the fuel port. To do that, I put the fuel port in this top plastic cover. Where the fuel inlet port goes is your choice. I prefer it in the top plastic cover because it is a protected area and it's as close to the fuel fill as you're going to get. Simply remove the two Phillips head screws that are in these locations. Incidentally, these are a number 3 Phillips head screw, not a number 2, so make sure to use the correct size screwdriver. And open up the fuel cap. I do not unbolt the front side because that's not necessary. And just ease the cover up away from the fill neck. You'll notice that there is a support bar that's bolted to the frame. It is steel. You'll need to position the fuel inlet port to where it slides or fits between the fuel tank and the support bar. If you look at this, you'll see that all the covers on the Yamaha generators have reinforcing ribs in them. So you'll need to stick your fingers under that cover and you can feel the reinforcing ribs through the foam. So what I'm going to do is take my hand and stick it in here, and I'm just feeling the bottom of this cover for where the reinforcing ribs are. Once again, I'm going to drill a pilot hole, 1/8 inch. Fortunately, this is a plastic cover. So drilling a pilot hole in there is pretty simple. And I'm simply sticking my hand under the bottom of it to check the location. Once you find where the location is, just with your fingernails scrape the foam. There's a thin layer of foam lining off of the underside, which is where your fuel fitting is going to come through at. I use a small Phillips head screwdriver to stick through it so I can make sure exactly where my fuel fitting is going to go through. This is a little bit time consuming, but it's not a race. Okay, the final hole is going to be drilled to a 1/2 inch. You can either use a step drill or a 1/2 inch drill bit. When using a step drill, you want to make certain that you don't drill the hole to the wrong size. Right now all I'm doing is deburring the hole. Deburring is usually done with a burring knife, which as you can see has a triangular shaped blade. Okay, another nice thing about using the 1/8 pilot drill for your initial hole is if you do put the initial hole a 1/4 of an inch off of where it needs to be, you can move the hole a 1/4 of an inch without any ill effect. If you do happen to drill the hole in totally the wrong spot, I guess you could put a screw in the hole, but as long as you slide your fingers under there and see where your webbing is and where it needs to go, I can't really see the likelihood of missing the target by more than a 1/8 to a 1/4 of an inch. Once you get the hole drilled and deburred, take the Teflon tape. You will get a roll of Teflon tape with the kit, and wrap it around the threads. Wrap at least 3 full layers, and do not overlap the end of the threads like that or something. If you do that, then the piece that you overlapped will be torn loose, and you have a chance that it could lodge in a place that would actually do harm. If you're lucky, it'll simply get caught in a fuel filter, no harm done. But why run the risk? What I'm going to be doing is holding the hose barb in place and screwing the fuel fitting in from the top. I would like it to end up with the fuel fitting pointed towards the end with the inverter unit in it. Now that the fuel fitting is mounted in place, I'm going to tuck these gaskets back around it. And that's pretty much as good a place as any to go ahead and take a break. Next item is going to be to remove the stock fuel hose. It goes from the fuel selector valve to the carburetor. You'll notice that the hose uses a simple spring clamp. You squeeze on the 2 tabs, opens up the clamp. You can either reuse the stock hose, stock hose clamp, or you can put one of the hose clamps included in the kit. There will be 2 different sizes of clamps. This hose would use the smaller ones. The kit comes with approximately 9 feet of fuel hose. Cut a section 30 inches long. You'll notice that it's cut off of a reel or a roll of hose. So as it's curved up like this, it will feed through the generator and plug up to the top of the inlet fuel fitting for the remote tank. So plug the T-fitting in so that the T-fitting also stays in line with the curve. Take one of the larger hose clamps included in the kit. And put that in place. This hose will be fitted all the way through to the other side of the generator. Then take the original hose that you disconnected from the carburetor and slide it onto the bottom of the T-connector. You can then either reuse the stock clamp like this, or you can use one of the smaller clamps included in the kit. You will get several of these. You can either choose to use these or reuse the stock clamps, your choice. Okay. This port on the fuel pump is the inlet port. So the hose that we just connected to the center on the T connector will go to the inlet port. And as you notice, when I had it measured to about 30 inches, there's plenty of leftover. So I'm going to go ahead and trim it. And fit it onto the inlet port of the fuel pump. Notice I have not tightened the fuel pump down. We'll put one of the larger hose clamps included in the kit onto this location. You notice where I routed this hose is just straight through at about the level of the bottom of the fuel tank. That way it doesn't run any interference against anything. Now what I'm going to do is connect a short section of hose to the hose barb that we installed earlier. This will also get a large hose clamp. You should be able to see it now. It's simply hooked to the hose barb. Incidentally, this was a 15-inch section of hose. This is the end of it, and it is going to go to the top of the T-fitting. So it's going to plug in just like this. This also gets a large hose clamp. That's probably a good place to end it to take a break. Okay, the next item is to take a section of hose, cut to 34 inches, and feed it through from this gap all the way through to the back. Easier said than done. And that's going to go onto the pulse port of the fuel pump. So that'll set on just like that. Then come over to this end, and you'll want to lay this hose just to the left of the fuel hose that you inserted before. And this hose will run behind the control panel and right to the pulse port on the valve cover that we installed earlier. So we'll go ahead and install this onto the pulse port. We'll take a large hose clamp. And remember, this is just a pulse line. It does not carry gasoline. Then on this end, we'll go ahead and put another hose clamp. Now on this side, here's a spar of the frame, and it comes around the corner right here. Right above where it comes around the corner, I'm going to drill a hole. I'll start with a 1/8 pilot hole, then I'll drill it out to 1/4 of an inch. The only thing that this hole is for is to pass a tie wrap through. And then I'm going to take these two hoses that we just routed and tie wrap them over against that spar by the fuel tank. And they're not going to be pulled up real tight. Just simply pulled over a little. Go ahead and take a break while I answer this phone. Okay, next step is going to be to take a piece of the 1/4-inch fuel line, cut to 26 inches, put it on the inlet side of the fuel filter. You'll notice that there is an arrow on the fuel filter which indicates the direction of fuel flow. And put a 14-inch section of fuel hose on the output side. Run the fuel hose underneath the blower housing, or where would be a recoil start if this generator had a recoil start. Hook this hose to the output on the fuel pump. This end is going to go to the inlet fitting on the carburetor, where we removed the stock fuel line from in the first place. And now if you'll notice, the fuel filter is right down here, and it is serviceable the same procedure that you would service the air filter. It's right under the air filter. Now take a large hose clamp, put it on to the output side of the fuel pump. Crimp that down tight. Take another large hose clamp, put it onto the inlet side of the carburetor. And squeeze it down tight. Now, take your number 2 Phillips head screwdriver and go ahead and finish tightening up the screws that hold the fuel pump on. At first you'll have to work them in and out a little bit to get them to cut threads. Once they do cut the thread, they will go nicely in. Like I stated earlier, these screws are 3/4 of an inch. So they should leave a considerable gap, which these do, between the tip of the screw and the fuel tank. Then take the large-headed black screws that held the fuel tank cover in place. And remember, these are number 3 Phillips. And go ahead and bolt the fuel tank cover into place. that seems like as good a place as any to go ahead and take a break. Okay. The next step is going to be put the instruction sticker on the top of the generator. And this simply explains how to operate the extended runtime fuel system, in case the person operating the generator is not the person who installed it. And of course it has a shameless advertising plug for me on it. The next step is going to be to go ahead and test the system to make sure that we did it right. Operation of the extended runtime fuel system is pretty straightforward and simple. It comes with a fuel hose with quick disconnect fittings on each end and a prime bulb. Make sure that the arrow on the prime bulb is facing in the direction of fuel flow, which means from the fuel tank to the generator. Make certain that there is fuel in the remote tank. Connect one quick disconnect fitting to the fuel tank and make sure that the vent on the fuel tank is open. Connect the other quick disconnect fitting to the fitting on the generator, and then slowly pump the prime bulb while watching the fuel filter. And when the fuel filter is full of fuel, you can go ahead and start the generator. Incidentally, you should always start the generators with the economy mode in the off position, so it's in standard run mode. The fuel selector valve, if you're running it off of the remote tank, put the selector valve in the off position. If you're going to be running it off of the stock tank, put the selector valve in the on position. Since we're going to be running it off the remote tank, we're going to have the fuel selector valve in the off position. Okay, I'm not going to leave it run for very long because we are in an enclosed area. What I'm going to do now is I verify that there's no fuel leaks at the fuel filter or any of the other fittings, and the system does start up and run. I'm going to go ahead and put the cabinet back on it, and we'll take it outside, and we'll run it for a couple of hours. Okay, the next step is going to be to put the cabinetry back on. The difference between the front panel and the rear panel is the front panel has a very small hole, and that's for the float bowl drain to pass through. The rear panel has a very large rubber plug in it, and that's for the oil drain. This panel is held on by two 6mm bolts at the top. Other positions on this cover that use screws, use the shouldered screw. shouldered screws, and then one more 6mm bolt goes in the bottom. The rear cover looks just like the front cover, except for the fact that it has the large rubber plug in the back, and that's so that the oil can be drained without removing the entire rear housing. This end cover has the boot that goes around the air intake to cool the stator assembly. Simply slides down into place. And the top, you may have to bow it to get it to tuck in between the left handles. Remember that the outer two top screws, use the screws with the lock washer on it. All the other locations, use the screws with the shoulder on them. this end cover. Slide it into place just like the other end cover. Once again, the upper two corners, use the screws with just the lock washer on them. All the other positions, use the screws with the shoulder on them. Cover. Slide the two top tabs up into place. There are snaps, incidentally, as I pointed out earlier when I took it off. You simply press in on and they snap into place. The bottom of it is held in place by screws. The front is also, slide these two tabs up into place, then snap these lock pins into place, and the bottom is held by two screws. The front cover, it's actually real easy to tell that the snaps are not in place right because there will be a gap between this rubber gasket and the actual control panel itself. The rear, unfortunately, is not quite so easy to tell. You just got to push on it and see if you feel any flexing. Okay, that's it for the cowling. The next step is going to be go ahead and lower it down to the ground. And we'll take it outside and we'll run it for a little while.